December 7, 1942, the tropical air above Lockheed Aerodrome hangs thick with humidity and the acrid smell of aviation fuel through the pre-dawn darkness. The distant rumble of twin Allison engines cuts through the jungle sounds of New Guinea like approaching thunder. Japanese pilots at the airfield below pause in their morning preparations, cocking their heads toward an unfamiliar sound, a deep, resonant growl unlike the high-pitched whine of their beloved Zeros or the familiar drone of American P-40 Tomahawks. They had grown accustomed to swatting from the sky like bothersome insects above. The clouds, 12 twin-boomed silhouettes, sliced through the morning mist. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning had arrived in the Pacific theater, and with it came the beginning of the end of Japanese air supremacy. But on this morning, neither the American pilots climbing toward combat nor the Japanese aviators below could foresee how completely this strange-looking aircraft would transform the aerial war in the Pacific for nearly a year. Japanese pilots had dominated the skies from Pearl Harbor to the Philippines. From the Dutch East Indies to the Solomon Islands, their Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, with their extraordinary maneuverability and experienced pilots, had carved a path of destruction across the Pacific that seemed unstoppable. American fighters, the chunky P-40 Warhawks, the temperamental P-39 Airacobras, and the stubby F-4F Wildcats appeared hopelessly outclassed by the nimble Japanese machines that could turn inside anything the Americans could field and climb away from danger with apparent ease. The Japanese pilots called their American opponents sitting ducks and joked among themselves about the crude American aircraft with their heavy construction and limited performance. These were not the swift, elegant machines of European warfare, but rather the products of an industrial nation that seemed to value quantity over quality, brute force over finesse. The Zero, by contrast, represented the pinnacle of aeronautical art-light, maneuverable, capable of extraordinary range, and flown by pilots trained in the ancient warrior code of Bushido victory. In the air seemed as natural and inevitable as the rising sun itself. Then came the Lightning, the P-38's first appearance over Japanese-held territory triggered confusion rather than concern. Intelligence reports described the twin-engine fighter as an experimental curiosity, an American attempt to match Japanese performance through mechanical complexity rather than aerodynamic elegance. Japanese aviation engineers scoffed at the Lightning's unconventional design: twin engines, twin booms, tricycle landing gear, and a central nacelle that looked more like a small bomber than a fighter. One intelligence analysis dismissed it as an overcomplicated monstrosity that sacrifices maneuverability for straight-line speed. The laughter stopped on December 27, 1942. Captain Thomas Lynch led 12 P-38 Lightnings off the steel mesh runway at Lockheed Aerodrome near Port Moresby, climbing rapidly toward an incoming formation of 25 Japanese fighters and dive bombers. The Japanese pilots, confident in their superior numbers and proven aircraft, eagerly anticipated another easy victory over clumsy American equipment. What they encountered instead shattered their fundamental understanding of American aviation capability. The P-38S struck the Japanese formation with devastating precision. In the span of minutes, 15 Japanese aircraft fell from the Sky-9 fighters and 6 dive bombers destroyed in a single engagement. Among the American pilots claiming victories that day was a baby-faced 22-year-old from Wisconsin named Richard Bong, who would eventually become America's highest-scoring ace with 40 confirmed kills. Every one of them achieved in a P-38 Lightning, but it was not just the numbers that shot the Japanese, it was the manner of their defeat. The P-38s did not engage in the traditional turning dogfights that favored the nimble Zero. Instead, they used their superior speed to control the terms of engagement, diving from altitude to attack. then climbing away before the Japanese pilots could respond effectively when Japanese fighters attempted to pursue. They found themselves hopelessly outrun by aircraft capable of speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour at altitude, nearly 80 miles per hour faster than the fastest Zero-variant Japanese pilot Saburo Sakai. One of the most experienced and successful fighter aces in the Imperial Japanese Navy, later wrote of his first encounter with P-38 Lightnings. The P-38, first used in combat against the Zeros, appeared to lack any distinctive features other than speed at great altitudes and very high diving speed. However, this was sufficient to give them a tremendous advantage. Sakai, who would eventually credit the Lightning with 64 aerial victories, had discovered what many of his colleagues would learn through bitter experience, that technological superiority could overcome traditional fighting skills when properly employed. Sound of P-38 engines became a harbinger of doom for Japanese aviation. Unlike the familiar roar of single-engine fighters, the Lightning's twin Allison V1710 engines produced a distinctive, harmonic resonance that Japanese pilots learned to fear. Radio intercepts revealed growing anxiety among Japanese aircrews as reports of Lightning encounters spread throughout the theater. Pilots, who had once eagerly sought combat, now spoke in worried tones about the twin-tailed devils that seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with lethal efficiency, and disappear before effective retaliation was possible. The transformation was not merely tactical, it was psychological. Japanese aviation had been built upon the foundation of spiritual superiority, the belief that the warrior spirit of the samurai could overcome any material disadvantage. The Zero embodied this philosophy, achieving remarkable performance through weight reduction and design optimization that prioritized pilot skill over mechanical robustness. But the P-38 represented a fundamentally different approach to air warfare, one that emphasized technological advantage, pilot survival, and systematic destruction of enemy capability, where the Zero carried two 20mm cannon and two 77mm machine guns in a lightweight package. The P-38 mounted four 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon in its nose, all concentrated along the aircraft's centerline for devastating accuracy. Japanese pilots quickly learned that a burst from a Lightning's concentrated firepower could tear apart even the most skillfully flown Zero in seconds. The American fighter's heavy construction, redundant systems, and twin-engine reliability meant that P-38s often returned from combat with damage that would have been fatal to single-engine aircraft. The psychological impact extended beyond individual encounters to strategic implications. The P-38's exceptional range, nearly double that of conventional single-engine fighters, meant that no Japanese installation within 1,000 miles of Allied bases could consider itself safe from attack. The twin engines provided not only power but also the reliability essential for long over-water flights. In the vast Pacific theater, where single-engine fighters faced the terrifying prospect of engine failure over hundreds of miles of empty ocean, P-38 pilots could lose one engine and still return home safely. This reliability factor became particularly evident during the war's most dramatic single mission, the interception and assassination of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto on April 18, 1943, when American codebreakers learned of Yamamoto's inspection tour of forward bases. Only one Allied fighter possessed the range and reliability necessary for the mission. The P-38 Lightning. 18 Lightnings took off from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal for a round-trip flight of over 1,000 miles, flying at wave-top level to avoid detection before climbing to intercept Yamamoto's transport aircraft over Bougainville. The mission succeeded beyond all expectations. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber, flying P-38s from the attack section, shot down both Japanese bombers carrying Yamamoto and his staff, the architect of Pearl Harbor. The strategic genius who had planned Japan's early victories died in the jungle of Bougainville, killed by the very aircraft he had once dismissed as inferior American. Engineering, the psychological impact on Japanese morale was devastating. If the P-38s could reach out across hundreds of miles of ocean to kill Japan's most important military leader, nowhere was safe. Industrial supremacy made manifest in aluminum and steel. Every P-38 that appeared in Pacific skies carried with it the implicit message that American war production was accelerating, that newer and more capable aircraft would continue to arrive in ever-increasing numbers, and that the brief period of Japanese air superiority was ending forever. Yet it was not merely the aircraft itself that transformed the Pacific Air War. It was the systematic application of American industrial and training methods to aerial combat. The P-38 squadrons represented a new approach to fighter operations, one that emphasized standardized tactics, rigorous pilot training, and the integration of advanced technology with combat experience, where Japanese aviation relied increasingly on hastily trained replacement pilots, flying worn-out aircraft with inadequate maintenance support. American P-38 units benefited from steady streams of well-trained pilots, modern equipment, and comprehensive logistical support. The contrast became particularly evident in the testimonies of surviving Japanese pilots, where early war encounters had been described in terms of individual combat between skilled warriors. P-38 encounters were characterized by systematic destruction of Japanese formations. The Americans had learned to fight as a team, using coordinated attacks that maximized their aircraft's advantages while minimizing opportunities for Japanese pilots to employ their superior turning ability. The romantic ideal of aerial combat as individual dueling between knights of the air gave way to the brutal reality of industrial warfare, where technological superiority and systematic tactics determined victory. Charles Lindbergh's arrival in the Pacific Theater during 1944 added another dimension to P-38 operations. The famous aviator, serving as a civilian technical representative, taught P-38 pilots advanced fuel management techniques that extended their already impressive range even further under Lindbergh's instruction. Lightning pilots learned to fly at high manifold pressure with reduced propeller RPM, a technique that significantly reduced fuel consumption while maintaining high power output. The result was missions of unprecedented range. Some P-38 formations flew escort missions of over 1,280 miles, reaching deep into Japanese-held territory that had previously been considered safe from Allied attack. The German Luftwaffe had already bestowed upon the P-38 the nickname Der Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil, in recognition of its deadly effectiveness in European skies. Japanese pilots adopted their own terms of fearful respect, calling the Lightning two planes, one pilot in reference to its twin-engine configuration, but also acknowledging the seeming impossibility of shooting down aircraft that could absorb tremendous damage and continue fighting. By 1944, the transformation of Pacific air warfare was complete. Where Japanese pilots had once laughed at American fighters, they now avoided combat whenever possible, reserving their dwindling aircraft and experienced pilots for desperate defensive actions. The P-38 had become the primary instrument of American air superiority, accounting for more Japanese aircraft destroyed than any other Allied fighter type, in the hands of pilots like Richard Bong, Thomas McGuire, Tommy Lynch, and hundreds of others. The Lightning had systematically decimated Japanese aviation, capability across the vast expanses of the Pacific. The symbolic power of the P-38 extended beyond its combat record to represent something fundamental about American industrial capability and strategic thinking, where the Zero embodied the Japanese philosophy of achieving superiority through lightness, elegance, and pilot skill. The Lightning represented the American approach of overwhelming technological advantage supported by massive industrial production. Each P-38 that rolled off Lockheed's production lines carried with it not just advanced engineering and heavy armament, but the implicit promise that American industry could produce such aircraft in quantities that Japanese production could never match. The laughter had indeed stopped. In its place came a growing recognition among Japanese pilots and commanders that they faced an enemy whose industrial and technological capabilities far exceeded their own. The P-38 Lightning, dismissed initially as an overcomplicated curiosity, had become the instrument of Japanese aviation's destruction, a twin-tailed harbinger of inevitable defeat that could appear anywhere in the Pacific skies with lethal effect. As the war progressed toward its conclusion, the P-38's role evolved from breakthrough weapon to symbol of American air supremacy. When General George Kenney, commanding Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific, was offered P-51 Mustangs to replace his Lightnings, he emphatically refused. The P-38's twin-engine reliability, long range, and proven combat effectiveness made it irreplaceable in the Pacific theater's unique operational environment, even as other fighters gained prominence in European skies. The Lightning remained supreme in the Pacific, continuing to hunt Japanese aircraft until the final days of the war. The story of Japanese pilots' encounter with the P-38 Lightning represents more than a tactical shift in aerial warfare. It embodies the broader transformation of global power that defined World War II. The aircraft that Japanese intelligence had dismissed as an overcomplicated American experiment became the instrument of their Air Force's systematic destruction, demonstrating that industrial capacity, technological innovation, and systematic application of resources could overcome traditional military virtues of skill, courage, and spiritual dedication. In the end, the P-38 Lightning stands as a testament to the power of American industrial democracy unleashed in pursuit of victory, where authoritarian regimes had sought to achieve military superiority through force of will and adherence to traditional military virtues. American democracy had responded with an outpouring of technological innovation and industrial production that overwhelmed all opposition. The twin-tailed fighter that once provoked laughter among Japanese pilots had become the symbol of their defeat and the herald of American victory in the Pacific sky. The distinctive sound of twin Allison engines, once unfamiliar and dismissed, had become the signature of freedom's advance across the Pacific, carrying with it the promise that democracy's industrial might, when fully aroused, could overcome any challenger and secure victory for the cause of human liberty.